Well, hi and welcome to another episode of 15-minute webinars, Keeping IT Simple. My name's Tim. If you've been on our sessions before, you will know who I am. If you haven't, then welcome. If you have been on my sessions, actually, yes, I'm still Tim. My hair is growing from both directions now, but hopefully next week will be the first week that we can actually get back and do something about it. So anyway, there we go. Let's move straight in and have a look at how we can work more efficiently with Microsoft Excel tables. So let me share my screen with you. So tables have been around since 2007. I think you've seen me going on about this on quite a few occasions, because tables for me is probably one of the best things that has come out of Excel for a long time. And what it means is that we can actually have Excel do a lot of things for us rather than us having to do them ourselves. And I'll point out what those are. I've got some data on my screen at the moment. It's just boring old sales data. No formatting on there. We've got a bit of bold down here, I suppose. But primarily, it's just a range of data. The way that you can tell if your data is in a range is simply click into one of the cells and do Control A. Control A will select all of the data from the cell that you've got highlighted, and it will highlight all of the cells around it that are part of that range. So I can see it starts in A4 and it finishes in I26. And I've actually got a total row at the bottom. One of the things that really annoys me about a normal range of data is that obviously it doesn't stand out. It's difficult to read. So I could start to go through and maybe, make it whatever colors you want it to be. Change the font to white so it stands out, put a bit of bold in my order total. But again, I'm having to do all of this myself. And the thing is that when I start to scroll down my data, inevitably we always lose that top row of our data. So I would have to go back and put my top row of my data on the screen there. And then I'd have to go to my view tab, freeze panes, freeze my top row. There we go. So now when I scroll, that was great. It's working. My top row is now frozen. The problem is I'm having to do all of this myself. And the problem is I can't see rows 1, 2, and 3 either now. So on one hand, they giveth, and then on the other hand, they took it away because I couldn't see anything above that row. Let's have a look at one extra thing. What about if I add a filter to my data range and I decide that I just want to look for information for a particular sales rep. So I want to look for FLW. Now, first of all, the problem was that my total row that was at the bottom there, all of a sudden has now disappeared. And that's because it considers it to be part of the actual filter itself. So the first thing I would have had to do was make sure that I've got a blank row in between my data. Now, when I put my filter onto this data, then I can now go and filter by individual sales reps. Now look at the total at the bottom, 87,000 at the moment. When I filter on just one sales rep, it still tells me it's 87,000, which is not the correct figure. So a data range is pretty useless at filtering and showing me in my normal auto sum exactly what my total is. It scrolls off the page. I've had to put my filters on there. Yeah, it's just not the best thing in the world. So in 2007, Excel came up with something called tables. Now what I'm going to do, before you turn your data into a table, make sure that you don't have any formatting on there. What I mean is put it back to automatic font, put it back to no fill, get rid of all your bold, get rid of any italics. It's basically just put it back to boring text, and even get rid of your filter. And then finally, I don't need a total row. No, I haven't got mad. You really don't need a total row, because what I'm going to do is put my data into a table and all these things will become available to me automatically. So I don't have to worry about doing it in future. So the way that I'm going to do it is I've got my data range, as you can see on the screen. I'm going to click into any cell within it. Then on your home tab, we have an option up here called Format as a Table. There is a shortcut, Control T for tables, if you don't mind getting the blue option. But a number 2 in a medium, but you can choose whatever color you want now. You've got 3 different types of styles. You've got light, you've got medium, and to be honest, I never venture across into the dark side. It's just a little bit weird down there, but if you're a bit weird, off you go. You've got the dark side as well. I normally end up with a number 21. I even know what number it is, and I'm going to change it to a 21. It says I've picked up all of your data. It gives you a border all around your data. And it says I've also guessed that your top row of your data is your header row, which is exactly right. So I'm going to say OK. In just one click of a mouse, what you find is that all of a sudden, I can see my data a lot better. Every other row of my data is now highlighted. And the thing about that, it's a lot easier to read. Imagine if you were going to do this highlighting manually. I used to do that. Pre-2007, I would spend time highlighting every other row of my data, and I would change the color of it, and it would take me a long time to do. And inevitably, I'd also realize I'd missed out an order number that I'd have to insert in between, and it threw all of my formatting out. Now I've created a table. We get a brand new tab on your ribbon called Table Design. You can go and change your table to whatever color you want to. It's even easier now because it will give me a preview if all I do is go and highlight as I move over these options. It didn't give me that in the first place. So you can have a look and see maybe you prefer something else. Now I'm going to stick with the number 21 for now. You get the option to change some of the styles. So I get a filter by default. Remember, I had to add that myself before. I don't have to worry about that in future. It's now changed the colors of my rows and my header row. I'd have to do that manually. I don't have to do that anymore. If I want to, I can change my first column and my last column to different colors. I can turn off banded rows if you prefer not to have every other row highlighted. Maybe you prefer banded columns instead. Does that make it easier to read? I don't know. It's entirely up to you. You could have banded rows and columns, again, if you're that way inclined, but it does look a little bit weird. However, if we have a look at our styles right now, it only looks weird in some of the actual styles. If I go back to my light version and I go back to a number 10 style and I choose it, look what happens. It actually gives me borders instead of highlighting rows and columns. So one of the things that I forgot to point out rather, is that get rid of any borders that you've created on your range. Yeah. If you've done it manually, get rid of them. You can do it automatically now from your tables. If you don't want borders on your columns, just take it off. No banded columns. If you don't want borders on any of them, turn off banded rows. But if you do want them on both, and I'll do a quick Control P for print, then that adds the borders to my data automatically now. So all of these things it's doing for me automatically. Now I'm going to come back over to my number 21. I'm going to put it in some reasonable order. Banded rows, no last column. I'll have a different color first column. That's fine. I'm also going to add a total row. Remember I said get rid of any total rows that you had? That's because a table has its own total row. And when I click it, look what happens. I get a brand new row on row number 26 for my totals. The thing is, you don't even have to know anything about your basic formulas. What happens, by default, it always puts the total on the last column on the right-hand side, which is pretty much where your data numbers normally sit. Now, I need to change the format of those. Before, you would probably select the whole of the column, which I would never suggest you do anyway, or you would get your mouse and you would highlight those particular cells. With a table, all I have to do is go above the header row. You get a little black arrow and I click it. It physically selects all my data in the column below. If I click it a second time, it will expand to my total. So now I can quickly go back to my home tab and I can choose whatever format I want to put in there. I'm sure you know we could have a big debate about formats, but there we go. We'll leave that for now. So now I've got my totals looking pretty good. I also want to have a total for my shipping charge. I can go into there. It's a drop down list. Do you want to sum these up? Do you want to work out what the average of this column is? So you no longer have to know how to do basic formulas. I want to count how many cells in this column for company are not empty. So I'm going to use the count option. The count option tells me there's 21 cells in there. So therefore I've got 21 orders. And all this is being done automatically for me. If you don't want to put a formula in your total row, just choose none and it will just turn it off. If you want it, just turn it on and it will come back. You don't have to have the total row displayed all the while. Now, if you look at my ribbon at the top, I've got a tab called Table Design. It only appears when you're in the table. If I was to click outside of the table over here in K8, that will disappear. As soon as you click back into the table, it will appear. Okay, it's a contextual tab. It only appears when you're in the table. Look what happens when I scroll down my page. Row number 4 is my header row. I haven't even frozen that row. And look what happens as I'm scrolling down now. A table actually replaces the column letters A, B, C, D with whatever the title of your columns are. I haven't frozen the top row of my data for over 13 years now because the table does that for me. And as soon as the table disappears, it says, okay, you can have your column letters back. As soon as it reappears, it says, oh, great, you can have your headers back. So that's what a table does for me. It gives me a frozen top row. It gives me a filter. It gives me an automatic total that I can turn off. I can turn on at any point in time. And even better is when I filter on my sales rep and I'm only interested in FLW, my total row is completely dynamic. It shows me what the totals are for my order, 25,668. It shows me what my average shipping charge is, 10.16, and it shows me how many orders this particular sales rep has actually done. If I was to go even further and say, yeah, but how many orders did they have for FedEx? And it says, well, they had 3 orders and they totaled £12,000. So if a dynamic total row has not got you excited by now, and the fact that it freezes my top row when it disappears, it actually changes the column letters, and the fact that we can make it look really nice and pretty in just a few clicks of a button, then yeah, perhaps you're on the wrong webinar. But I think you can see how much time and how much effort this actually saves me. How do I add new data to a table? Well, you've got 2 choices. You can turn off your total row if you wanted to. I can then just type underneath what my new order is going to be. Okay. Notice how it now pulls it into the table. I press tab instead of pressing enter. And what it's done, look, it's gone across to the right and it's actually given me a new row. All I have to do is type in the data that I want, the sales rep, who it is, the date that it's going to be, including my shipping date. What was the method of shipping? FedEx. Okay, the shipping charge was a 10. It was 30 days. And then I just say how much the order was. All I'm doing, I'm skipping across with my tab key. Look what happens when I'm in the last column now of my table, which is order total, and I press tab. It actually creates a brand new row for me. And that's what a table will do. Every time I press tab and I get to the end of my column, it will just give me a new row in my table. The table expands as we go through. I can then turn on my total row and see what my new totals are based on that data. Now, what about if you don't want to turn off the total row? So let me just delete these 3 rows in my table. Now, I'm not going to delete the whole of the rows in my sheet. It might contain other data over here, might have a set of numbers over here. If I delete the rows in my table, it's going to delete my rows across the whole of my sheet. All I'm going to do is select 3 cells in the rows I want to delete, and I'm just going to right click and say delete only the table rows. And look what happens. It has no impact at all on any data outside that table. So the beauty of this is, even if I do have my total row on, I can still add new data without the manual intervention of me inserting a new row above that table, above the total rather. All I have to do is click into the last cell of my order total, the last data cell directly above my total, and I press tab. It simply moves down your total row so you can then go on and add more data. And your total row is just moving down and down and down and down. How many things have I done now that I would normally have to do manually? This is all part of the table, and now it saves me all this time. Now let me just move straight to the end of this. If you look at the table design tab over on the left hand side, a table has got a name. You can actually rename it so it makes sense as to what your data is all about. I'm going to call this my sales data. Now my sales data has a name. That table is now called sales data. Whenever I want to do anything with this table, I don't have to tell anybody what sheet it's on, what column it starts in, what row it starts in. I only have to refer to it by name. So look what happens if I want to actually summarize all of this data now into the pivot table. Now I'm only going to keep the pivot table simple. We could do a whole 15 minutes on pivot tables, but on the table design tab, a table has even got its own button, summarize with a pivot table. So all I do is click onto that button. It says I'm picking up the data from a table called sales data. That's all it needed to know. I'm going to put it on a brand new worksheet and I'm going to say OK. All I have to do now to summarize my data is choose what I want to summarize. And I want to summarize all of the sales by company. And there we go. I have a full summary now of all the data. Let me just format that for every company that I've sold to in that table. The benefit of that is if I add more data to my table now, what I'm going to quickly do, I'm just going to turn off my total row. I'm going to go and copy and paste some data that I've just had given to me by my sales team. Notice that the date format in the shipping date is, well, we don't even want to talk about it. It's that long date format. For those of you who have commented on my LinkedIn post, you know how upset I get with long dates, but people like it. If you look over here, my order total has not even been formatted. But anyway, I'm going to copy all of these. There's no colors on it. There's nothing else. I'm just going to copy it as normal. And I'm going to go back to my table and I'm just going to paste it directly underneath my last row. That was the reason that I turned off my total row. And when I just do a normal paste on that now, look what happens. Not only does my data get converted, I get a short date. I get all the formats on there for whatever my format was for order total. I even get the same color scheme now. And all I did was paste it into my table. I can then, if I wanted to, put my total row back on and see all of my dynamic totals again. But the beauty of a table is if I go back to my pivot table, all I have to do for my pivot table is refresh the data from my table and it will bring in all of that new information for me. I didn't have to change the data source. I didn't have to tell it. I've just added another 20 rows or whatever to my data. Excel knows where it is because it's just there by name. I could go on for another 10 or 15 minutes about what tables are good at and why they're well worth getting into. If you're thinking of doing Power BI or Power Query at a later date, your data ends up in tables. If you import your data from any of the options, from any files, from text, PDF, from a workbook, from any of the databases, they will end up in your workbook as a table. So why not get used to tables now? So when you do make that jump and start looking at those features, you will know exactly what a table is all about. Just before you go, at the end of our sessions, we always have the draw to see who's going to win 15 minutes one-to-one time with me. Last week was Dave Banks. We still have to get together, but I'm sure we will at some point. He is aware of it. So this week, let's see who the winner is. Okay. I don't have a surname, but Murad, I will contact you. I've got your email address, and then whatever you want to go through with 15 minutes of my time, I will be happy to do so. If you would like to subscribe to a reminder about what we're going to do with our webinars every other Friday and be in with a chance of winning 15 minutes of my time, then all you have to do is in the chat panel, I'm going to put a quick link in there. Click on the link, give us your email address. I'm not going to bombard you with any sales talk. I'm not going to bombard you with anything to do with anything else other than the 15-minute webinar. So if you want to be in with a chance of doing that next week, sorry, not next week, the week after, every 2 weeks, then just sign up on our form. Thanks for joining us again. I hope you found the 15 minutes useful. Off you go. Tables should be your new best friend.